Let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Architect of Fortune. Maxwell Thornton didn't build his empire by trusting blindly. As the founder of Thornton Security Systems, he had spent 20 years developing technology that protected others from threats, yet somehow missed the one growing within his own home. The October rain pelted against the windows of his downtown office as he gazed at the Seattle skyline. From this height, the city lights blurred into a golden haze through the streaking raindrops. His phone buzzed on the desk. "Sir, your wife called again. She wanted to remind you about tonight's dinner with the Polson family," his assistant Naomi said. "Tell her I'll be there," Maxwell replied, his voice betraying nothing of the storm brewing inside him. For 3 months, Maxwell had known something was amiss. Veronica, his wife of 15 years, had changed. The subtle shifts would have been imperceptible to anyone else. A password changed on her phone, late night, work emergencies at her art gallery, and a newfound interest in privacy. But Maxwell had built his entire career on noticing things others missed. When he arrived home that evening, their sprawling lakeside estate was illuminated for the dinner party. Veronica greeted him at the door, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You're late," she whispered, fixing his tie with practiced hands. "Traffic," he lied, when in truth he'd been meeting with private investigator Liv Donnelly, reviewing the latest surveillance photos. Inside, their children, Sierra, 16, and Colin, 14, barely acknowledged his presence, too engrossed in their devices. The dinner unfolded with practiced precision, with Veronica playing the perfect hostess to Gary and Melinda Polson. "Maxwell, how's your father doing?" Gary asked between bites of grilled salmon. "I heard his condition has worsened." Maxwell nodded solemnly. "The doctors give him weeks, maybe days." "Such a shame," Veronica commented with rehearsed sympathy. Walter was always so vibrant. Later that night, as the house fell silent, Maxwell slipped into his private study and unlocked a hidden safe beneath the floorboards. Inside was a leather-bound journal containing handwritten notes tracking every inconsistency in his family's behavior over the past year. He added today's observations, including how Sierra had quietly excused herself during dinner to take a call, whispering excitedly about when everything changes. Maxwell closed the journal and placed it carefully back in the safe. His father's impending death would accelerate everything. Walter Thornton's fortune, combined with Maxwell's own security empire, would be worth nearly $1 billion. What Veronica and her secret lover didn't realize was that Maxwell had spent the last 5 years preparing for this exact scenario, not out of paranoia, but because he'd seen too many men destroyed by betrayal. As he closed the safe, his phone vibrated with a text from Liv. "Confirmed. Meeting again tonight. Same location." Maxwell's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened into glacial blue intensity. The game was in motion, and he had been several moves ahead since the beginning. Chapter 2. Threads Unraveling. The antiseptic smell of Seattle General Hospital's VIP wing had become all too familiar over the past weeks. Maxwell sat beside his father's bed, watching the once powerful industrialist struggling for each breath. Walter Thornton had built his manufacturing empire from nothing, instilling in his only son an uncompromising work ethic and a simple philosophy. "Trust is earned, not given." "The doctors say you should rest, Dad," Maxwell said softly. Walter's weathered hand grasped his son's with surprising strength. "They're circling already, aren't they?" His voice was a raspy whisper. Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "Who? Don't play dumb, boy. I wasn't born yesterday." The older man's eyes, though clouded with medication, held the same shrewd intelligence that had intimidated business rivals for decades. "I've seen how she looks at you now. Like you're an asset to be liquidated." Maxwell remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. "Remember what I taught you," Walter continued. "The Thornton fortune isn't just money. It's power. And power." He paused for a labored breath. "Power reveals." "I know, Dad. Save your strength." After leaving the hospital, Maxwell drove to a nondescript warehouse in the industrial district. Inside, amid rows of server racks and monitoring equipment, Tanner Bryce waited. The former military intelligence officer had been Maxwell's head of security for 7 years, and the only person he trusted completely. "How's the old man?" Tanner asked, his scarred face illuminated by the blue glow of computer monitors. "Dying," Maxwell replied bluntly. "What do you have for me?" Tanner handed him a tablet. Your wife visited the gallery last night, but left after 20 minutes. Her car then traveled to this address. A map appeared on screen, highlighting a luxury apartment building downtown. Preston Davenport's place, Maxwell noted, naming his wife's supposed art dealer friend. They spent 3 hours together. Your daughter has also been texting him regularly. Tanner swiped to show message logs, mostly about how everything will be better soon and questions about colleges in Europe. Maxwell's jaw tightened. And my son. The boy's been promised a Lamborghini when he turns 16, apparently. Tanner pulled up another screen. There's more. Your wife has been meeting with Teresa Campbell, the divorce attorney. The best in the state, Tanner confirmed. And she's been making inquiries about your father's will. Maxwell paced the room, processing the information. The betrayal was expected, but seeing the evidence, how deeply it ran, how even his children had been turned against him, still cut like a knife. Have you considered just confronting her? Tanner asked. Maxwell shook his head. Not yet. I need to understand how far this goes. Later that evening, Maxwell returned home to find Sierra packing a suitcase. Weekend trip with Mom, she explained curtly when he inquired. Girls' getaway. That sounds nice, he replied, noting how she avoided eye contact. Where are you headed? Just a spa resort. You wouldn't be interested. Her phone buzzed with a text, and she angled it away from him instinctively. From his peripheral vision, Maxwell caught the name Preston on the notification. Sierra quickly typed a response before looking up at him with a practiced smile. Don't worry about dinner this weekend. Colin's staying at Braden's house. After she left, Maxwell went to his son's room, knocking lightly before entering. Colin sat hunched over his gaming console, barely acknowledging his father's presence. Everything okay, buddy? Maxwell asked. Fine, came the terse reply. I thought we could go fishing this weekend, like we used to. Colin snorted. I have plans. With Braden? A flicker of confusion crossed Colin's face before he recovered. Yeah, with Braden. Maxwell nodded, noting the lie. Have fun then. He closed the door and walked to his study, where he opened his laptop and accessed a secure server. The GPS trackers he had installed in his children's phones showed Sierra was currently en route to Preston Davenport's apartment, not packing for any trip. He pulled up financial records showing recent transfers from Veronica's private account to offshore holdings. The amounts were significant but careful, just below thresholds that would trigger automatic notifications. More damning were the series of consultations she'd had with estate lawyers and financial planners, all specializing in high-net-worth divorces. The pieces were aligning exactly as he had anticipated years ago. Maxwell closed his laptop and poured himself a measure of scotch, contemplating the chess game before him. His opponents thought they were making clever opening moves, unaware he had already mapped out the entire match to its inevitable conclusion. He picked up a photo of his family taken at Christmas, everyone smiling, a perfect portrait of happiness. Maxwell set it face down on the desk. In the reflection of the window, he saw not the successful businessman and family man the world knew, but the calculated strategist his father had raised him to be. When people show you who they are, he murmured to himself, recalling his father's words, believe them the first time. Chapter 3, The Final Betrayal. The day of Walter Thornton's funeral dawned with appropriate gloom, sheets of rain cascading down as black-clad mourners huddled under umbrellas in the cemetery. Maxwell stood stoic beside the grave, his face a mask of appropriate grief, while his mind catalogued every detail of his surroundings. Veronica stood at his side, her hand resting performatively on his arm, dressed impeccably in designer mourning wear. Sierra and Colin stood slightly apart, frequently checking their phones when they thought no one was looking. And across the gathering, partially obscured by an ancient oak tree, Preston Davenport observed the proceedings, ostensibly paying respects to a business associate, but Maxwell knew better. The service concluded, and the attendees moved to their vehicles for the reception at the Thornton estate. As Maxwell turned to leave, his longtime lawyer and friend, Oliver Walsh, approached him. We need to discuss the will, Max. Your father made some unconventional requests. Can we speak privately before the reception? Maxwell nodded, noticing how Veronica's attention immediately sharpened, though she pretended to be absorbed in consoling an elderly aunt. At the Thornton mansion, Mourners mingled in subdued conversations, while caterers circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres and drinks. Maxwell excused himself to join Oliver in his father's former study. Through the partially opened door, he glimpsed Veronica on her phone, texting rapidly. "Your father's final amendments were unusual," Oliver began once they were alone. He insisted on a public reading of the will, rather than private notification. Said it was essential to the process, his exact words. Maxwell allowed a thin smile. He always did have a flair for the dramatic. "There's more." Oliver hesitated. Walter left instructions that the reading should happen exactly 2 hours after the funeral service ended. He was quite specific. "Let me guess. Everyone must be present." Oliver nodded. "Family, key employees, even some business associates. It's highly irregular, but it's what he wanted," Maxwell finished. "Let's proceed as instructed." 2 hours later, the study was packed with selected guests. Veronica had positioned herself prominently near Maxwell, with Sierra and Colin beside her. Preston Davenport had been invited as a valued business associate and stood uncomfortably near the back. Maxwell noted with interest how Sierra kept glancing at him. Oliver cleared his throat and began reading the document. The standard bequests came first: charitable donations, mementos to old friends, specific instructions for the business. Then came the core of the estate. "The remainder of my assets, including controlling interest in Thornton Industries and all personal holdings, I leave to my son, Maxwell Walter Thornton, to be managed at his sole discretion." A ripple of whispers moved through the room. Maxwell maintained his composure, though he caught the flash of alarm that passed between Veronica and Preston. "With one condition," Oliver continued. "Should Maxwell predecease me, or should he be deemed incapacitated or otherwise unable to manage these assets within 1 year of my death, all holdings shall pass to my daughter-in-law, Veronica Preston Thornton, to be divided as she sees fit among herself and my grandchildren." The room fell silent. Maxwell felt Veronica tense beside him, her hand suddenly gripping his arm with false sympathy. "We should discuss this in private," she whispered urgently. "Of course," Maxwell replied calmly. As the guests began to disperse, Maxwell noticed Preston slip out, followed shortly by Sierra, who claimed she needed fresh air. In the kitchen, Colin was already on his phone, speaking in hushed tones. Maxwell excused himself and retreated to the master bathroom, locking the door behind him. He checked his watch, exactly on schedule. He sent a pre-composed text to Tanner. Phase 1 complete. When he returned downstairs, the remaining guests were leaving. Only family and Oliver remained. Veronica approached him with affected concern. "Maxwell, we should talk about what this means for us, for the children's future," she began. Before he could respond, the doorbell rang. When their housekeeper answered, a courier stood there with a legal envelope. "Delivery for Veronica Thornton," he announced. All eyes turned to Veronica as she accepted the envelope with visible confusion. Opening it, her expression shifted from bewilderment to triumph in an instant. She pulled out legal documents and thrust them toward Maxwell. "Your father's funeral seemed like an appropriate time to end this charade," she declared, her voice suddenly cold. "I filed for divorce. The family fortune is legally mine now, according to Walter's will." Sierra and Colin moved to stand beside their mother, their faces hardening into unified contempt. "We're changing our last name to Davenport," Sierra announced. "You're dead to us anyway." "Mr. Thornton," the housekeeper interrupted softly, "there are reporters gathering outside the gate." Maxwell realized with grim satisfaction that Veronica had timed this for maximum public humiliation. The grieving son losing everything on the day of his father's funeral would make headlines across Seattle. He simply nodded and walked toward the door. As he passed Oliver, he murmured, "Begin phase 2. Outside, a light rain had resumed. Maxwell walked calmly past the waiting reporters without comment, got into his car, and drove away from the estate that had been his home for 15 years. In his rearview mirror, he could see Veronica speaking animatedly to the press, the perfect picture of a wronged wife finally breaking free. What none of them knew was that everything, from Walter's death to this very moment, had unfolded exactly according to the plan Maxwell had set in motion years before. The true game was only just beginning. Chapter 4: Ashes and Shadows. The Silver Lake Motel sat on the outskirts of Seattle, its neon sign flickering pathetically in the persistent drizzle. Room 117 had become Maxwell Thornton's temporary home, a far cry from his lakeside mansion with its 6 bedrooms and infinity pool overlooking Puget Sound. The room smelled of industrial cleaner, barely masking decades of cigarette smoke. Maxwell sat on the edge of the sagging bed, 3 burner phones arranged neatly beside him, each labeled for a different purpose. On the scarred desk lay newspaper clippings and tabloid printouts. Tech security titan served divorce papers at father's funeral. Thornton children disown father. He was never there for us. Veronica Thornton claims emotional abuse in explosive filing. Maxwell's face remained impassive as he read each headline. He had withdrawn exactly $9,000 from ATMs, just below the reporting threshold, before Veronica's legal team could freeze his accounts. His credit cards were worthless now, his supposedly joint bank accounts suddenly inaccessible. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He checked the peephole before opening it to admit Tanner Bryce. "You look like shit," Tanner observed, dropping a duffel bag on the floor. "All part of the performance," Maxwell replied. "What's the update?" Tanner pulled out a laptop. "Veronica has moved Preston into the house already. They've been seen celebrating at Canlis, Altura, all the high-end spots. The press is eating it up, the victim finally finding happiness." Maxwell nodded, unsurprised. "And the children?" Sierra posted about her fresh start with her real dad on social media. "Colin's been showing off the new Rolex Preston bought him. The company? The board is nervous. Your absence and the media circus have spooked investors. Stock dropped 12% at opening." "Perfect." Tanner raised an eyebrow. "You expected this?" "I counted on it." Maxwell opened the duffel bag, revealing stacks of cash, a new phone, and documents. "Is everything in place with Helena?" "Yes. She's prepared to testify about Preston's past business practices when the time comes. But she's nervous. His reputation for retaliation isn't exaggerated." Maxwell checked his watch. "And Oliver?" "Fielding calls nonstop. Veronica's team is pushing for emergency orders to gain control of everything based on your abandonment and mental instability following your father's death." A thin smile crossed Maxwell's face. "Right on schedule." The following morning, Maxwell appeared disheveled and unshaven for his meeting with Oliver at a quiet coffee shop across town. Several patrons recognized him, whispering and pointing discreetly. "You need to pull yourself together," Oliver hissed. "Teresa Campbell is arguing that your behavior proves you're unfit to manage the estate. If the judge agrees, Veronica gets everything based on your father's will condition." "What's the timeline?" Maxwell asked, deliberately slurring his words slightly when a nearby customer glanced their way. "Emergency hearing next week. They're fast-tracking everything while you're—" Oliver gestured vaguely at Maxwell's unkempt appearance. "Good," Maxwell whispered, his eyes suddenly sharp and focused. "Make sure you file the standard objections, but don't fight too hard. We need them confident." Oliver lowered his voice further. "The offshore accounts are secure. They have no idea about Switzerland or the Caymans." "But Max, are you sure about this? Once we let them take control of Thornton Industries, they won't destroy what they think will make them rich," Maxwell replied. "Preston's too greedy for that." Later that day, Maxwell drove to an industrial area in South Seattle, parking behind a warehouse with BD Electronics on its faded sign. Inside, past security doors requiring multiple access codes, he entered a state-of-the-art command center that would have impressed military contractors. Liv Donnelly looked up from a bank of monitors. "They're moving faster than anticipated. Veronica's gained temporary access to your personal accounts based on community property laws." "And the special account?" Liv smiled. "Untouched. They don't know it exists." Maxwell settled into a chair, suddenly transformed from the broken man at the coffee shop to the calculating strategist. On the screens around him, surveillance feeds showed various locations. His former home, where Preston was hosting a pool party, Preston's downtown apartment, now vacant, and the offices of Thornton Industries, where executives huddled in concerned meetings. "Begin Phase 3, Maxwell instructed. It's time Veronica learned that some inheritances come with hidden costs. A week later, Maxwell deliberately missed the emergency hearing. Oliver called immediately afterward. "It went exactly as you predicted," the lawyer reported. Judge Watkins granted Veronica temporary control based on your failure to appear and concerning reports about your mental state. They're celebrating at the mansion right now. Is the package ready? Yes, but Max, this crosses a line. If anyone ever discovers. They won't, Maxwell interrupted. Deliver it tonight, as we discussed. That evening, as Veronica hosted an impromptu victory party, a courier arrived with a sealed legal envelope addressed to her personally. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an account number and password, along with a handwritten note, the real Thornton fortune. Access before midnight or lose it forever. Veronica excused herself and rushed to her study, logging into the account with trembling fingers. The balance showed $212 million, far more than what the publicly known Thornton assets were worth. As she stared at the screen, a message popped up. Transfer initiated. Verification required. Without hesitation, she entered her personal identification details and authorized the transfer to the account listed, one she presumed was safely in her control. The screen flashed confirmation before going black. When she tried to log back in, the account no longer existed. In his command center, Maxwell watched through hidden cameras as Veronica frantically called her lawyer, her face contorted with panic. He turned to Liv. How long until she realizes? The money was never there, Liv confirmed. But she just provided all the verification we needed to document attempting unauthorized access and wire fraud. The account is flagged with federal authorities. Maxwell nodded, satisfaction evident in his eyes. And now we wait. Chapter 5. The Spider's Web. 3 weeks after being granted control of Thornton Industries, Preston Davenport called an all-hands meeting at the company headquarters. The atrium was packed with anxious employees as he unveiled his vision for the future, a radical restructuring that would shift focus from security systems to consumer electronics. The security market is saturated, he declared from the podium, Veronica beaming at his side. Our future lies in home automation and entertainment systems. We'll be divesting our government and corporate security divisions immediately. In a dingy apartment rented under a false name, Maxwell watched the live stream on a laptop, noting how Preston's announcement sent immediate shockwaves through the industry. Thornton Industries' stock plummeted 18% by closing bell, with analysts questioning the drastic strategy shift. He's playing right into our hands, Tanner remarked, scrolling through real-time financial data. Department heads are already reaching out to headhunters. 3 major clients have announced they're reviewing their contracts. What about the Harbinger project? Maxwell asked. Still secure. Preston doesn't have clearance to access those files, and even Veronica doesn't know it exists. Maxwell checked his watch. Time to introduce some chaos. The following day, anonymous whistleblower complaints were filed with the SEC regarding potentially fraudulent practices at Thornton Industries under its new management. Though baseless, the complaints triggered automatic reviews and further damaged investor confidence. Simultaneously, key employees began receiving attractive job offers from competitors. Within days, Preston found himself presiding over a company hemorrhaging talent and market value. Veronica, meanwhile, had begun her own transformation. Gone was the sophisticated gallery owner who had built her reputation in Seattle's art world. The woman who now appeared in society pages wore clothes too young for her, attended clubs with Preston until dawn, and spent lavishly on jewelry and sports cars. At Sierra's exclusive private school, rumors spread about her mother's behavior. The teenager arrived one morning to find former friends suddenly unavailable, invitations to parties rescinded. When she confronted one classmate, the girl simply showed her a viral video of Veronica stumbling drunkenly from a nightclub, shouting obscenities at photographers. Colin faced similar ostracism at his prep school, exacerbated by an anonymous tip to the administration about his selling prescription medications to classmates. Though no evidence was found, the investigation cast a shadow over him. By month's end, the Thornton name had transformed from respected to notorious. Veronica's spending accelerated as her social standing collapsed, creating tension with Preston, who found himself responsible for a failing company and unexpected expenses. She's draining accounts faster than anticipated, Liv reported in their secure meeting space. Preston's leveraged his personal assets to try stabilizing the company, but it's like plugging holes in a sinking ship. Maxwell nodded thoughtfully. And the offshore account? Veronica's attempted to access it multiple times. The fraud investigation is building a substantial case based on her repeated efforts. What about the children? Tanner pulled up surveillance images. Sierra's planning to graduate early and attend university in Europe, away from the embarrassment her mother's become. Colin's grades are plummeting. He's been caught drinking on campus twice. A flicker of something, perhaps regret, crossed Maxwell's face before disappearing. They made their choice, he said flatly. Time for Phase 4. The next morning, Preston arrived at Thornton Industries to find federal agents in the lobby. The whistleblower complaints had escalated to a formal investigation, with agents seizing servers and documents related to company finances since the change in management. Preston called Veronica in a panic. They're saying there are irregularities in the accounts. Unauthorized transfers, missing funds. What the hell have you done? Me? Veronica hissed. You're the one who promised this company was our ticket to wealth. Just get back here now. And bring your lawyer. As Preston hung up, his assistant entered with more bad news. The company's largest government contract had been suspended pending the investigation. Without it, they would miss payroll within weeks. That afternoon, while Veronica and Preston were occupied with federal investigators, Maxwell made his first public appearance in weeks. Clean-shaven and impeccably dressed, he arrived at the office of Phaedra Reynolds, one of Seattle's most respected wealth managers. Mr. Thornton, she greeted him warmly. I was surprised by your call. Thank you for seeing me on short notice, he replied. I believe it's time to discuss the Lazarus Protocol. Phaedra's expression shifted to one of understanding. She retrieved a secure tablet and entered a complex series of passwords. Everything is ready, as you instructed 3 years ago. Are you certain you want to proceed? Maxwell's blue eyes were cold as Arctic ice. Absolutely certain. Very well. She handed him a biometric authentication device. Once activated, there's no reversing the process. Without hesitation, Maxwell pressed his thumb to the sensor. They built their future on sand, he said quietly. Now the tide comes in. Across the city, a devastating series of legal and financial maneuvers began unfolding with the precision of a military operation. Liens appeared against the Thornton mansion. Credit lines were suddenly canceled. Trust accounts established for Sierra and Colin were frozen pending investigation of irregular activities. By evening, as Veronica and Preston returned home exhausted from hours of questioning, their phones began pinging with urgent alerts from banks, credit card companies, and financial institutions. Preston's personal accounts had been frozen due to suspicious linkages with the Thornton Industries investigation. This is impossible, Preston muttered, frantically calling his personal banker, only to be directed to the fraud department. Someone's orchestrated this. Veronica's face paled as realization dawned. Maxwell, she whispered. But how? He has nothing left. We took everything. Preston laughed bitterly. Apparently not. The house phone rang, startling them both. Preston answered to hear Oliver Walsh's measured tones. Mr. Davenport, I'm calling to inform you that the property you're currently occupying has been placed in receivership pending resolution of multiple claims against it. You and all occupants are required to vacate within 72 hours. This is absurd, Preston shouted. We'll fight this. You're welcome to try, Oliver replied calmly. However, I should inform you that similar actions are being taken against all properties and assets currently under your or Ms. Thornton's control. Good evening. As Preston slammed down the phone, Sierra and Colin appeared in the doorway, their faces taut with anxiety. What's happening? Sierra demanded. My credit card was just declined at Nordstrom. It's humiliating. Veronica turned to her daughter, panic rising. It's fine, honey. Just a misunderstanding. Like the college fund that's suddenly under review. Sierra's voice rose. The admissions office at Ecole Polytechnique called. My application is in jeopardy because the financial guarantees are invalid. Colin pushed past his sister. My Instagram is blowing up with people saying we're broke. That we're being investigated for fraud. Preston's phone buzzed with an incoming email. His face went ashen as he read it. The board has called an emergency meeting. They're considering suspending me pending the investigation. As the family descended into panicked argument, none of them noticed the small, blinking light of the hidden camera capturing every moment of their unraveling. In his command center, Maxwell watched the scene with detached interest. Right on cue, he murmured. Pressure reveals character. Liv looked troubled. Your children are suffering too. They chose their side, Maxwell replied, though a muscle tightened in his jaw. Actions have consequences. He turned away from the monitor displaying his former family and focused instead on financial data streaming across another screen. Begin the final phase. It's time to bring this game to its conclusion. Chapter 6. The Illusion of Defeat. The auction drew a modest crowd of curious onlookers and serious buyers. Under the fluorescent lights of the hotel conference room, items from the Thornton estate were arranged in numbered lots. Furniture, artwork, electronics, and jewelry accumulated over 15 years of marriage. From the back of the room, wearing a baseball cap and nondescript clothing, Maxwell observed as Veronica's prized possessions sold for fractions of their value. Court-ordered liquidation to satisfy creditors was a humbling process, made more so by the gossiping spectators. I heard she's living in a 2-bedroom apartment now, a woman whispered to her companion. And he's moved to California. Couldn't face the humiliation. Maxwell smiled faintly. The carefully crafted rumors were spreading exactly as planned. The auctioneer held up a platinum wedding band. Lot 37, gentleman's wedding ring with diamond inlay. Starting bid, $500. Maxwell watched dispassionately as his former wedding ring sold to a pawnbroker for $750. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. The final visible connection to his former life, disposed of in seconds. Outside the auction house, Maxwell slipped into a waiting car where Tanner sat behind the wheel. How'd it go? Tanner asked. Predictably, Maxwell replied. What's the status on Preston? Board meeting just ended. They've suspended him indefinitely while the investigation continues. 3 major clients have canceled contracts in the past week. The company's value has dropped 64% since he took control. And our friends at the FBI? Building their case methodically. The evidence trail Veronica created trying to access that phantom account is gold. They've expanded the investigation to include Preston's previous business dealings. Maxwell nodded, satisfied. Time to disappear completely. The next morning, Seattle's news outlets reported that Maxwell Thornton had apparently fled the country. Border records showed him boarding a flight to Switzerland, and financial experts speculated he was attempting to access hidden accounts before authorities could freeze them. In reality, Maxwell was settling into a modest cabin on Washington's Olympic Peninsula, accessible only by private road and shielded from satellite imaging by dense forest canopy. The property, purchased through multiple shells years earlier, was registered to an elderly Montana couple who didn't exist. For the next 2 weeks, Maxwell maintained complete communication silence while Tanner and Liv monitored the situation in Seattle. The carefully constructed narrative continued to unfold. Maxwell Thornton, once respected business leader, had abandoned his responsibilities and fled justice, leaving chaos in his wake. Meanwhile, Preston Davenport's financial and legal troubles multiplied daily. Without access to Maxwell's true resources and knowledge, he made increasingly desperate attempts to save Thornton Industries, leveraging everything he owned as collateral for emergency loans. Veronica, facing her own legal challenges from the fraudulent account access, turned on Preston, blaming him for encouraging her actions. Their relationship deteriorated into public arguments captured by eager paparazzi. The children, Sierra and Colin, retreated from social media as former friends abandoned them and trolls multiplied. On day 17 of his disappearance, Maxwell received his first update from Tanner via secure satellite connection. Everything's proceeding as anticipated, Tanner reported. The government investigation has expanded to include tax evasion. Veronica's gallery is being audited. Preston's previous company is now under scrutiny for accounting irregularities. The children, Sierra's European university aspirations are finished. Colin was caught with alcohol again. He's been suspended. They're both living with Veronica in a rented condo in Bellevue. Preston moved out last week after their fight at Law Code made the gossip columns. Maxwell processed this information silently. And the Harbinger project? Still secure and advancing on schedule. The team believes they'll have a working prototype within months. Excellent. Prepare for my return. 2 days later, a devastating expose appeared in the Seattle Times, revealing that Preston Davenport had previously been investigated for securities fraud at his former company, though charges were never filed. The article suggested his relationship with Veronica began while consulting on artwork for his office. nearly 2 years before the divorce. More damaging were leaked text messages between Veronica and Preston discussing how to accelerate access to the Thornton fortune, with explicit references to Walter Thornton's declining health and the inheritance conditions. The public reaction was swift and merciless. Overnight, the narrative shifted. Maxwell Thornton was no longer the villain who abandoned his family, but potentially the victim of a calculated conspiracy. Veronica's phone rang constantly with calls from former friends distancing themselves from the scandal. Sierra and Colin faced renewed harassment, now accused of being complicit in the scheme against their father. Preston, already fighting for his professional survival, found himself branded a predator who had targeted a wealthy family. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Preston arrived at Thornton Industries to find his access card deactivated. The board had voted unanimously to terminate him and cooperate fully with federal investigators. As security escorted him from the building, employees watched through windows, some openly smirking at his downfall. That evening, as Veronica and the children ate takeout in their sparsely furnished condo, the doorbell rang. A courier handed over a sealed legal envelope addressed to all three of them. Inside was a simple note and a USB drive. "You chose your side. Now live with it. MT." Veronica's hands trembled as she inserted the drive into her laptop. A video began playing, surveillance footage from their former home, capturing dozens of private conversations over the past 2 years. Conversations about Maxwell, about Walter's money, about getting what they deserved. Most devastating was footage of Sierra and Colin laughing with Preston about their pathetic dad and discussing how they would spend their inheritance once Veronica gained control. "He has everything," Veronica whispered, her face ashen. "He was watching us the entire time." Sierra grabbed the laptop. "We need to destroy this. If this gets out, it's too late," Colin interrupted, pointing to the screen where a message now appeared. "Copies have been provided to relevant authorities and media outlets. Broadcasting begins tomorrow." In the silent moments that followed, each of them realized the same thing. Maxwell hadn't fled in defeat. He hadn't been destroyed by their betrayal. He had orchestrated everything, leading them step by step into a trap of their own making. Veronica lunged for her phone, frantically dialing her lawyer. The call went straight to voicemail. One by one, she tried other numbers, her financial advisor, friends, even Preston, with the same result. It was as if an invisible wall had suddenly been erected around them, cutting them off from potential allies. "What's happening?" Sierra demanded, her voice rising with panic. Veronica had no answer. But across the city, in a private dining room at Seattle's most exclusive restaurant, Maxwell Thornton was ending his self-imposed exile, hosting a dinner for selected business associates and media figures. Immaculately dressed and radiating quiet confidence, he raised a glass and toast. "To new beginnings," he said simply. The trap had been sprung. The game was entering its final phase. Chapter 7. The Architect Revealed. Dawn broke over Seattle with the steady rhythm of rain against windows becoming background noise to the media storm engulfing the city. Every local station and major news website featured the same explosive story: the Thornton conspiracy exposed. The leaked surveillance videos showed Veronica, Preston, and even the Thornton children plotting over months, discussing Walter Thornton's death as an opportunity, calculating how to maximize their gains from the family fortune. The timestamp on one particularly damning clip, recorded 3 days before divorce papers were served at the funeral, showed Preston coaching Veronica on what to say. "Your family fortune is legally mine now. Make it hurt." In her Bellevue condo, Veronica sat rigid on the sofa, surrounded by empty wine bottles as she watched her reputation disintegrate in real time. Her phone had been ringing constantly, not with calls of support, but from journalists seeking comment and former friends expressing shock and disgust. Sierra emerged from her bedroom, eyes red-rimmed. "My social media accounts are flooded with hate messages. People are calling us gold diggers and worse. Where's your brother?" Veronica asked flatly. "Still asleep. He took something last night after." Sierra didn't finish the sentence. After they'd watched more videos revealing the extent of their betrayal, Colin had raided the liquor cabinet and disappeared into his room. The doorbell rang, startling them both. Veronica approached cautiously and checked the peephole. A tall woman in a tailored suit stood outside, flanked by two men with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. "Veronica Thornton?" the woman asked when the door opened. "I'm Special Agent Diana Winters, FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft by deception." As the agents led a shell-shocked Veronica away in handcuffs, Sierra stood frozen in the doorway. Across the hall, a neighbor filmed the entire scene on his phone, undoubtedly adding to the viral content already circulating. Across town, at his downtown apartment, Preston Davenport was experiencing his own moment of reckoning. Federal agents were boxing documents and electronics, while his lawyer argued unsuccessfully against the scope of the search warrant. "This is persecution," Preston shouted as agents discovered a hidden safe behind a bookshelf. "Maxwell Thornton is framing me." Agent Winters smiled thinly. "Mr. Davenport, we've been investigating your financial activities for over 3 years. Mr. Thornton simply provided additional evidence that corroborated our existing case." Preston's face drained of color. 3 years? That's impossible. I only met Veronica 2 years ago. "Interesting that your mind went straight to Veronica Thornton," the agent observed. "We were actually referring to irregularities at your previous company, Davenport Solutions. But please, continue making connections for us." At Thornton Industries headquarters, employees gathered around monitors in the atrium, watching live news coverage of the unfolding scandal. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd as the main doors opened and Maxwell Thornton walked in, accompanied by Oliver Walsh and several board members. Maxwell paused, surveying the stunned faces before him. "I believe we have work to do," he said calmly. Hours later, after back-to-back meetings with executives and key team leaders, Maxwell settled into his restored office. The view of Seattle's skyline was unchanged, though everything else had transformed. Oliver sat across from him, reviewing documents. "The board's emergency session was unanimous," Oliver reported. "You've been reinstated as CEO with expanded authority to stabilize the company." Stock jumped 15% on the announcement. Maxwell nodded. "And the Harbinger project?" "Untouched. Preston never even discovered it existed." "Perfect." Maxwell turned to the window, watching rain streak across the glass. "What's the status on the federal cases?" "Moving quickly. The evidence is overwhelming. Preston's previous legal issues make him particularly vulnerable. Prosecutors are already talking plea deal in exchange for testimony against Veronica. They'll both serve time." "And my children?" Oliver hesitated. "They're not facing charges, but it's bad, Max. Their involvement was clearly documented in the videos. Sierra's university offers have been rescinded. Colin's school is considering expulsion. They're essentially pariahs." A muscle tightened in Maxwell's jaw. "They made their choices. They're still your children," Oliver said quietly. "Teenagers who were manipulated by adults they trusted." "Everyone has choices," Maxwell replied coldly. "They chose Preston and everything he promised them." That evening, Maxwell returned to the penthouse apartment he'd maintained secretly for years, a luxurious space unknown to Veronica or the children. Tanner and Liv were waiting with updates on the day's developments. "Preston's lawyer is trying to negotiate," Tanner reported. "He's offering to reveal additional details about the conspiracy in exchange for leniency." "Decline," Maxwell replied. "He has nothing we need." Liv hesitated before speaking. "There's something else you should know. Colin attempted to contact you through the company website. The message was flagged by our systems." Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "What did it say?" Liv handed him a tablet. The message was brief. "Dad, please. We didn't understand what was happening. Can we talk?" "Colin." For a moment, something flickered across Maxwell's face. Perhaps doubt, perhaps pain, before the mask of control returned. No response necessary. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, Maxwell stood at the window overlooking the city lights. In his hand was an old photograph of Sierra and Colin as young children, laughing as he pushed them on swings. He studied it momentarily before returning it to a drawer. His phone chimed with a news alert. Preston Davenport released on $2 million bail. Maxwell smiled thinly and sent a text to an unlisted number. "The spider has left the web. Proceed." Across the city, in an upscale hotel where Preston had taken refuge from media cameras, a hotel employee delivered a manila envelope to his room. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing a chess notation. "Checkmate in 3 moves." Preston crumpled the paper, his hands shaking with rage and fear. The game wasn't over yet. Chapter 8. The Price of Betrayal. The Emerald Lounge atop Seattle's Columbia Tower offered breathtaking panoramic views of the city, Puget Sound, and on clear days, the Olympic Mountains beyond. Tonight, however, Preston Davenport noticed none of it as he hunched over his third scotch, checking his phone obsessively for updates from his legal team. When the bar stool beside him became occupied, he didn't look up until a familiar voice ordered, "McAllen, 25. Neat." Preston's head snapped up to find Maxwell Thornton sitting beside him, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit that made Preston's designer attire seem suddenly gauche. "You," Preston hissed. "You've got some nerve showing your face." Maxwell accepted his scotch from the bartender with a nod of thanks. "Interesting choice of words from a man who moved into my house and tried to steal my company. I'm facing federal charges because of you." "No," Maxwell corrected calmly. "You're facing federal charges because of your own actions. Actions that began long before you met my wife." Preston's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Davenport Solutions. 2019. The DoD contract that mysteriously came your way after you spent a weekend in Aspen with Senator Harrington's aide. The subsequent inflation of performance metrics to secure additional funding. The offshore account in Belize where your consulting fees accumulated." The blood drained from Preston's face. "How could you possibly know?" "I know everything about you, Preston. I knew who you were before you ever met Veronica." Maxwell sipped his scotch. "Did you really think it was coincidence that put you in her gallery that day? That of all the art consultants in Seattle, she happened to contact you?" Understanding dawned in Preston's eyes. "You orchestrated the whole thing. From the beginning. Not everything. I didn't make you seduce my wife. I didn't force you to manipulate my children against me. I simply created the opportunity and watched what you would do with it." "Why?" Preston demanded. "Why go through all this?" Maxwell's blue eyes hardened. 3 years ago, I discovered irregularities in my company's government contracts. Small but significant discrepancies that could have cost us millions and damaged our security clearances. The trail led to a mole within Thornton Industries, someone feeding information to a competitor. He paused to take another sip of his drink. That competitor was Davenport Solutions. "Your company. Your operation." Preston shook his head in denial. "That's absurd. I would have known." "Would you?" Maxwell interrupted. "You were too busy enjoying the profits to question where the intelligence came from. But I questioned everything. That's why I created a trap, a false security vulnerability that would have catastrophic consequences if exploited. When your team attempted to use it against a government client, I had my proof. You could have just turned me in," Preston said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and risk a public scandal that would damage confidence in my company's security systems. No, I needed something more comprehensive." Maxwell finished his scotch and set the glass down deliberately. "I needed to understand the full extent of the threat. So I began watching you, studying you. I learned about your financial problems, your desperation to maintain your lifestyle despite your company's struggles." Preston swallowed hard. "So you dangled Veronica as bait." "I simply removed certain safeguards and observed what happened naturally. Your reputation as a man who covets other men's possessions preceded you. Veronica was unhappy, restless. The attraction was predictable." "You're insane," Preston whispered. "No," Maxwell corrected. "I'm methodical. There's a difference." Preston reached for his drink with a trembling hand. "What do you want from me now? Why are you here?" Maxwell glanced at his watch. At this moment, federal agents are executing additional search warrants on storage facilities registered to shell companies linked to your former CFO. They'll find evidence that will ensure you spend at least 15 years in federal prison. He stood, adjusting his cuffs. "I'm here as a courtesy, to let you know there's an alternative." "What alternative?" "A private jet is waiting at Boeing Field. It will take you anywhere outside U.S. jurisdiction. You have enough in your Belize account to disappear comfortably. The authorities don't know about that particular account yet. By the time they do, you'll be established elsewhere under a new identity that my associates have prepared." Preston stared in disbelief. "Why would you help me escape?" "I'm not helping you escape. I'm giving you a choice. Prison, where you'll eventually testify against Veronica to save yourself, or exile, where you'll never contact any member of my family again." Maxwell's voice turned glacial. "Either way, you're removed from the equation. And if I refuse both options, go public with what you've told me tonight." Maxwell smiled thinly. Who would believe you? The desperate accusations of a man facing multiple federal indictments? Besides, you have exactly 43 minutes before the FBI finds the evidence that will remove all possibility of bail. Preston's shoulders sagged in defeat. You've thought of everything. Not everything, Maxwell replied. I never anticipated how far you would go with my children. That was unexpected. For a moment, something like genuine emotion flickered across Maxwell's face. Sierra and Colin were collateral damage in a war they didn't understand. For that, I hold you personally responsible. Preston paled at the cold fury underlying Maxwell's controlled tone. The jet departs in 90 minutes, with or without you, Maxwell continued, placing a key card on the bar. This accesses the private elevator to the helipad. A helicopter is waiting to take you to the airfield. He turned to leave, then paused. One last thing. The pilot has instructions to divert to a U.S. airfield if I don't send a specific confirmation within 2 hours. Choose quickly, but choose wisely. As Maxwell walked away, Preston called after him. What about Veronica? Is she getting the same offer? Maxwell didn't turn around. Veronica made her choices. Now she lives with the consequences. Across the city, in a federal detention center, Veronica sat in an interview room with her court-appointed attorney. Her designer clothing had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit, her carefully styled hair now limp and unwashed. The prosecution has a very strong case, the attorney explained. The surveillance videos, the financial records, the documented attempts to access accounts fraudulently. It's overwhelming. Maxwell set me up, Veronica insisted. He manipulated everything. The attorney sighed. Mrs. Thornton, the videos clearly show you discussing these plans months in advance. Your voice, your words, in your home. What about my children? Where are they? Your daughter Sierra is staying with your sister. Your son Colin has been placed in temporary foster care after an incident at your sister's home. The attorney hesitated. There's something else you should know. Mr. Thornton has filed for sole custody, citing abandonment and parental alienation. Veronica's face crumpled. He can't take my children. Given the evidence and their ages, the court is likely to consider their preferences. And right now, the attorney left the implication hanging. They blame me, Veronica whispered. The prosecution has offered a deal. 10 years instead of 25 if you testify against Preston Davenport. Veronica stared blankly at the wall. Maxwell knew this would happen. All of it. Mrs. Thornton, focus please. We need to decide on the plea offer. But Veronica wasn't listening. In her mind, she was replaying moments from the past years, subtle warnings she'd missed, questions from Maxwell that seemed innocuous at the time, but now revealed calculated information gathering. The safe in his study that she could never access. The unexpected business trips that coincided with her meetings with Preston. He was always 3 steps ahead, she murmured. Always. Miles away, at his sister's suburban home, Colin Thornton sat on the edge of a bed in the guest room, staring at his phone. The screen displayed a text he'd sent hours ago to his father. Please, Dad. I'm sorry. I didn't understand what was happening. The message showed as delivered but unread. Colin had sent dozens of similar messages over the past weeks, each met with the same digital silence. His door opened, and Sierra entered, her face drawn with exhaustion. Aunt Catherine wants to know if you're eating dinner. I'm not hungry. Sierra sat beside him. Any response? Colin shook his head. He's never going to forgive us, is he? Sierra's voice cracked slightly. Would you if you were him? Colin asked bitterly. We called him pathetic. Said we were changing our name. That he was dead to us. And it's all on video for the world to see. Sierra wiped away a tear. Preston manipulated us. Made us believe Dad never cared about us. We were stupid to believe him. We were kids who believed what we wanted to hear. Sierra stared out the window. I had a full ride to Stanford, you know. Before all this. Now no school will touch me with this scandal attached to my name. Colin's phone suddenly chimed with an incoming text. Both teenagers froze, then lunged for the device. The message wasn't from their father, but from an unknown number, roof of Columbia Tower. 1 hour. Come alone if you want answers. T. Who's T? Sierra asked. No idea. Colin was already reaching for his jacket. But I'm going. Not alone you're not, Sierra declared. We've made enough mistakes separately. We do this together. An hour later, the Thornton siblings emerged from the elevator onto the observation deck of Columbia Tower, closed to the public at this late hour, but mysteriously accessible with their regular key cards. The night was clear, the lights of Seattle spreading below them like a carpet of stars. At the far end of the deck, a man stood watching the harbor. "Mr. Bryce?" Colin called hesitantly, recognizing his father's head of security. Tanner Bryce turned, his scarred face impassive. "You came. Both of you. Are you here for Dad?" Sierra asked. "Did he send you?" "No," Tanner replied. "He doesn't know I'm here. And it needs to stay that way." "Then why contact us?" Colin demanded. "Because you deserve to understand what happened. The full story, not just the parts your father has allowed to become public." For the next 30 minutes, Tanner explained the elaborate chess game Maxwell had been playing for years, how he had suspected Preston's industrial espionage long before Veronica's infidelity, how he had created a trap that would reveal every disloyal person in his orbit. "Your father didn't just want Preston's illegal activities exposed," Tanner explained. "He wanted to know who could be trusted. Unfortunately, that test extended to his family." "He tested us?" Sierra's voice rose incredulously. "His own children?" "He gave you opportunities to choose sides," Tanner corrected. "Multiple chances to demonstrate loyalty. Instead, we failed," Colin finished quietly. "Every time." Tanner nodded solemnly. "Your father is a man who values loyalty above all else. The betrayal by his children cut deeper than anything Veronica or Preston did. Is there any way to fix this?" Sierra asked, tears streaming down her face. "Any way back?" Tanner hesitated. "Your father has filed for custody, despite everything. That suggests something remains. But understand this, Maxwell Thornton never forgives betrayal. The best you can hope for is that he might eventually move past it, given enough reason." "What should we do?" Colin asked. "That depends. Do you want his forgiveness or his respect?" Tanner checked his watch. "I need to go. I've already said more than I should." He handed each of them a business card with only a phone number printed on it. "If you decide you want to try, call this number. But only if you're serious. There are no second chances with your father." As Tanner walked away, Sierra called after him. "Is he happy now? Without us?" Tanner paused, but didn't turn around. "Your father is never happy, Miss Thornton. He's satisfied or unsatisfied. Right now, he's simply focused on rebuilding what was broken." With that, he disappeared into the elevator. The siblings stood in silence, staring out at the city lights. "What do we do now?" Colin asked eventually. Sierra gripped the railing, her expression hardening with resolve. "We stop being victims. We take responsibility. And we prove to him that we're Thorntons, not what Preston tried to make us." Below them, the city continued its rhythmic pulse, unaware of the family drama playing out high above. And somewhere in that sprawling landscape of lights, Maxwell Thornton sat alone in his penthouse, watching security footage of his children on the observation deck, listening to every word of their conversation with Tanner through hidden microphones. His expression revealed nothing as he closed the laptop, leaving their fate and his decision unresolved in the darkness. Chapter 9. Ashes and Rebirth. 3 months later, Seattle's financial district buzzed with anticipation. Thornton Industries' stock had not only recovered, but soared to unprecedented heights following the announcement of the revolutionary Harbinger security system, a quantum encryption protocol that made digital communications virtually unhackable. In the gleaming glass headquarters, Maxwell sat reviewing quarterly reports when Oliver entered with the day's newspapers. The headlines told the story of Preston Davenport's capture in Bali after attempting to flee to a non-extradition country. His jet had mysteriously diverted to an American airfield where federal agents were waiting. "I thought you gave him the opportunity to escape," Oliver remarked, setting the papers on Maxwell's desk. "I gave him a choice," Maxwell corrected. "He chose to betray my terms by attempting to contact Veronica before leaving. Actions have consequences." Oliver nodded, having long accepted his friend's implacable nature. "The custody hearing is tomorrow." Maxwell's expression remained neutral. "Yes. The children have submitted character statements. Would you like to read them?" "No. Their actions will speak louder than any prepared statements." Oliver hesitated. "They've both been working, you know. Sierra's been volunteering at a youth shelter downtown. Colin's been doing maintenance work at his school to pay for damages from his previous incidents." "I'm aware." "Of course you are," Oliver sighed. "Will you at least consider speaking with them before the hearing?" Maxwell turned to the window, watching rain streak across the glass. That will be all, Oliver. Later that evening, Maxwell drove to a secluded restaurant in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. The exclusive establishment, accessible only by private road, catered to clients who valued absolute privacy. He was shown to a table overlooking a waterfall, where Tanner already waited. "Everything's in place for tomorrow," Tanner reported after the waiter departed. "Veronica's accepted the plea deal. 15 years with possibility of parole after 8. The divorce is final." Maxwell nodded. "And Preston, facing multiple federal charges plus additional counts related to his escape attempt. His assets have been frozen. He's cooperating fully, hoping for leniency, which he won't receive," Maxwell noted with cold satisfaction. Tanner shifted uncomfortably. "There's something else you should know. I spoke with your children 3 months ago." Maxwell's gaze sharpened. "You've been monitoring them as instructed?" "Yes. They've adhered to every condition you established through Oliver. No contact attempts. No media interviews. Focus on education and restitution." "But," Tanner met his employer's eyes directly, "but they're still your children, Max. They made terrible mistakes, but they were manipulated by adults they trusted. At some point, this has to end." Maxwell's expression hardened. "It ends when I decide it ends." "And when will that be? After you've punished them enough? After they've suffered sufficiently?" Tanner's scarred face reflected genuine concern. "How much penance is enough?" For a long moment, Maxwell was silent, the only sound the rushing water of the falls outside. Finally, he spoke quietly. "They stood at my father's grave and told me I was dead to them. How does one quantify the response to that? By remembering they were children. Misled children." Maxwell sipped his water, his expression unreadable. "I have a meeting to prepare for. We'll continue this discussion another time." The following morning, clouds hung low over the King County Courthouse as Maxwell arrived for the custody hearing. Media cameras tracked his progress from car to entrance, but he moved with practiced indifference to their shouted questions. Inside, the courtroom was closed to press. Maxwell sat alone at one table, Oliver beside him with documentation in precise stacks. Across the aisle, Sierra and Colin sat at another table with a court-appointed guardian ad litem, both teenagers in conservative attire that couldn't quite mask their anxiety. When the judge entered, formalities proceeded efficiently. Given the circumstances, Veronica's incarceration and the children's ages, the hearing was largely procedural. Sierra, at 17, would soon age out of the custody system regardless. Colin, at 15, had less than 3 years remaining as a minor. "Before I make my determination," the judge announced, "I'd like to hear from the minors themselves." She turned to Sierra. "Miss Thornton, do you wish to make a statement?" Sierra stood, hands trembling slightly as she faced the judge rather than looking at her father. "Your Honor, I've prepared a statement, but I'd like to speak from my heart instead." She took a deep breath. 3 months ago, I stood in a funeral home and told my father he was dead to me. I said cruel, horrible things that I can never take back. Things I'm deeply ashamed of now. Her voice wavered but steadied as she continued. "I was manipulated by people I trusted, but that's no excuse. I made choices, terrible choices, and I hurt the one person who had always protected me. I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't forgive myself. But I am my father's daughter, and Thorntons face consequences. I'm ready to face mine, whatever they may be." She sat down, wiping away a tear. The judge nodded and turned to Colin. The boy stood, visibly nervous but determined. "Your Honor, my sister and I have spent every day since this happened trying to understand how we could have been so blind. Our father isn't perfect, no one is, but he never deserved what we did to him." Colin glanced briefly at Maxwell before continuing. "We were offered everything we wanted by people who only valued us as weapons against our father, and we let them use us that way. There's nothing I can say to make that right." He swallowed hard. "If the court grants my father custody, I'll accept whatever rules or restrictions he sets. If not, I understand. Either way, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the name Thornton again." The courtroom fell silent as Colin returned to his seat. The judge reviewed her notes before addressing Maxwell. "Mr. Thornton, would you like to respond to your children's statements?" Maxwell rose slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor, I've listened to my children's words today, as I've observed their actions over the past 3 months. They speak of facing consequences and accepting responsibility. These are values I tried to instill in them from an early age." He paused, his tone measured and controlled. "The decisions that brought us to this courtroom were not made overnight. They developed through hundreds of small choices, each one taking us further from what family should mean. Rebuilding what was broken will similarly require many small choices moving in a better direction." Maxwell turned slightly, making direct eye contact with his children for the first time in months. "I am prepared to undertake that process, with appropriate boundaries and expectations in place." The judge nodded. "Given the circumstances and the preferences expressed by the minors, I'm granting full custody to Maxwell Thornton, with a review in 6 months to ensure the arrangement remains in the children's best interests." After the formalities concluded, Maxwell exited the courtroom with Oliver, the teenagers following at a respectful distance. In the private antechamber reserved for participants, Maxwell finally turned to face his children directly. "There are conditions," he stated without preamble. "You'll both continue your community service commitments. Your devices and communications will be monitored. You'll meet weekly with Dr. Harrington for counseling. Sierra, you'll complete high school before considering college applications. Colin, your academic performance must improve dramatically." The siblings nodded silently, accepting each condition without protest. "You won't return to the mansion immediately. I've arranged an apartment near my penthouse where you'll live with supervision. Privileges will be earned, not assumed." "We understand," Sierra said quietly. Maxwell's expression remained stern. "Trust, once broken, doesn't mend easily. I don't know if it can be restored completely. That depends on choices you make going forward." "What about forgiveness?" Colin asked hesitantly. Maxwell's blue eyes were cold as Arctic ice. "Forgiveness isn't part of this arrangement. Forgiveness is a gift I'm not prepared to offer. What I'm offering is an opportunity to rebuild. Nothing more." The teenagers exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them before Sierra spoke. "That's fair. More than fair, considering everything. Oliver will provide the details. We're done here." Maxwell moved toward the door, then paused. "One last thing. The Thornton name is not a birthright. It's earned through loyalty, integrity, and strength. Remember that." With those parting words, he left, the door closing firmly behind him. 6 weeks later, Maxwell stood in his penthouse office, reviewing security footage from the apartment where his children now lived. Sierra was studying diligently for finals while Colin worked on a history project. Both had adhered meticulously to every condition he'd established, without complaint or negotiation. Tanner entered with the evening security report. Everything in order at both residences. The children followed their approved schedules exactly. Maxwell nodded absently, his attention on another monitor showing Veronica in prison attire during a supervised visitation with her lawyer. She looked diminished, her once confident posture now defeated. "She's requested another meeting with the prosecutors," Tanner reported, offering additional testimony against Preston in exchange for sentence reduction. "Denied," Maxwell replied flatly. She made her choices. Later that night, Maxwell stood alone on his penthouse balcony, watching the city lights shimmer through a fine mist. His phone chimed with a message, a daily report from Sierra and Colin's counselor noting their continued progress and commitment to the therapy process. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and raised his glass in a silent toast to the Seattle skyline. The game was over. He had won completely, just as he'd planned from the beginning. His enemies were ruined, his company thriving, his reputation restored, and even enhanced by his merciful decision to take back his wayward children. Yet victory tasted different than he had imagined during those dark days after the funeral. The satisfaction was there, certainly, cold and precise, but accompanied by something unexpected. Not regret, exactly. Maxwell Thornton didn't indulge in regret. Perhaps it was simply recognition that even the most decisive victory carried costs. His phone rang, the secure line used only by his most trusted circle. Tanner's voice came through with uncharacteristic urgency. "There's been an incident at the children's apartment. Colin collapsed during dinner. Possible allergic reaction. Paramedics are en route." Something shifted in Maxwell's expression, a crack in the perfect control. "I'm on my way." At the hospital, Maxwell strode through the emergency department with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. A doctor met him at the entrance to the treatment area. "Mr. Thornton, your son is stabilized. Severe allergic reaction to shellfish, complicated by elevated stress levels. He'll need to stay overnight for observation, but he should recover fully. Maxwell nodded curtly. Where is he? The doctor led him to a curtained alcove where Colin lay pale against white sheets, and four in his arm, and monitoring equipment beeping steadily. Sierra sat beside the bed, clutching her brother's hand. When she saw her father, she stood quickly. I'm sorry, she blurted. We didn't know he was allergic to shrimp. It wasn't on any of the medical forms. He developed the allergy when he was 12, Maxwell replied, moving to the bedside. After the last time you had shellfish together. Colin's eyes fluttered open. Dad, he whispered weakly. Sorry about this. Maxwell studied his son's face, the features that echoed his own, the vulnerability he hadn't allowed himself to see for months. Without speaking, he reached out and adjusted the thin hospital blanket, pulling it higher over Colin's chest in a gesture of parental concern so automatic it seemed to surprise even him. Rest, he said simply. Then, to Sierra, you should go home. The security team will drive you. I want to stay with him, she protested, then quickly added, if that's allowed. Maxwell paused, weighing the request against his carefully constructed system of earned privileges. Fine, I'll stay as well. Throughout the night, Maxwell remained in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, working on his tablet, while Sierra eventually dozed in another chair. Occasionally, he would look up to check the monitors or observe Colin's breathing. Once, when a nurse came to adjust medication, Maxwell questioned her thoroughly about dosages and potential side effects, his protective instinct evident beneath the businesslike demeanor. Near dawn, Sierra awoke to find her father standing at the window, watching the first pale light breaking over the city. Why did you file for custody? She asked suddenly. After everything we did, you could have let us go into the system. No one would have blamed you. Maxwell didn't turn from the window. You're Thorntons. Is that the only reason? Obligation to the family name. For a long moment, Maxwell was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice held something Sierra hadn't heard in years, uncertainty. When I watched those videos, saw you both laughing about me with Preston, planning your lives without me, I wanted to cut you off completely. Delete you from my life as you had deleted me from yours. He turned slightly, his profile silhouetted against the lightening sky. But then I remembered something my father told me once. What was that? Sierra asked softly. That the true measure of power isn't what you can destroy, but what you choose to rebuild. Maxwell finally turned to face her fully. I don't know if we can rebuild this family. The foundation may be too damaged, but not trying would be a failure I'm not willing to accept. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even warmth. But in the economy of emotion that governed Maxwell Thornton's world, it was an opening. Narrow and conditional, but real. From his hospital bed, Colin spoke suddenly, his voice clearer than before. Mom told us you never really loved us, that you only saw us as extensions of yourself. Maxwell's expression tightened. Your mother said many things that served her purposes. But was she right? Colin pressed. Maxwell looked between his children, measuring his response. Love isn't a simple emotion. It's complex, particularly for someone like me. But everything I've built, everything I've done, has been to secure your futures, to make you strong enough to stand in a world that doesn't forgive weakness, even when that meant letting us fall. Sierra asked, sometimes especially then. Maxwell checked his watch. The doctor will be making rounds soon. We should discuss your return to school, Colin, and what accommodations you'll need during recovery. Just like that, the moment of vulnerability closed, the walls reassembling around Maxwell's carefully guarded inner life. Yet something had shifted, a microscopic adjustment in the familial geometry that all three recognized, but none acknowledged openly. 6 months later, on a clear December evening, Maxwell hosted a small dinner at his penthouse. Sierra and Colin, now living there under strict but gradually relaxing conditions, had prepared the meal as part of their continuing efforts to demonstrate responsibility. As they ate, conversation remained largely formal. Discussions of school projects, company developments, and community service experiences. But occasionally, brief moments of something like normal family interaction would surface. Colin sharing a joke that prompted a reluctant half-smile from Maxwell. Sierra describing an art installation that actually sparked genuine interest from her father. After dinner, as Sierra cleared dishes, Colin approached Maxwell on the balcony. I heard about Mom's appeal being denied, he said carefully. And Preston's additional charges for trying to contact her from prison. Maxwell nodded. Justice continues its course. Colin hesitated, gathering courage. Do you ever wonder if there could have been another way? If you could have stopped them without the collateral damage? Maxwell finished. Without the public humiliation, the criminal charges, the irreparable harm to reputations. He turned to face his son fully. There's always another way, Colin. I chose the path that would be most complete, most definitive, most ruthless, Colin added quietly. Yes, Maxwell acknowledged without apology. Mercy can be a weakness when dealing with those who mistake it for opportunity. Even with family? Maxwell's gaze was steady, especially with family. The closer someone is to you, the more devastating their betrayal. The response must be proportional. Colin nodded slowly, processing this harsh philosophy. I think I understand now. Not just what you did, but why. He looked out at the city lights. I don't want to be like Preston, taking what isn't mine, betraying people who trust me. But I don't know if I can be like you either. For the first time in their recent interactions, something like approval flickered in Maxwell's eyes. Good. You shouldn't be like me. You should be better. Learn from my methods without adopting my limitations. Inside, Sierra called that dessert was ready. As they turned to go in, Maxwell placed a hand briefly on Colin's shoulder, a gesture so unexpected that the boy nearly flinched. The Thornton name doesn't require you to be ruthless, Maxwell said quietly. Only that you be strong enough to protect what matters, by whatever means necessary. It wasn't forgiveness. Maxwell Thornton didn't forgive betrayal. It wasn't reconciliation in any conventional sense. But in the complex calculus of this family's new reality, it was an acknowledgement that reconstruction had begun, brick by careful brick, on a foundation forever altered but not entirely destroyed. As midnight approached, Maxwell stood alone on the balcony after the children had retired to their rooms. His phone displayed a notification from the prison system. Veronica's latest request for reconsideration had been denied, ensuring she would serve her full sentence. He closed the notification without emotion and looked out at his city. Everything had unfolded according to his design. His enemies were vanquished, his fortune secure, his company thriving. The price had been high, trust irrevocably shattered, innocence lost, family bonds reconstructed as strategic alliances rather than unconditional connections. Was it worth it? The question lingered unanswered in the cold night air. Maxwell Thornton, architect of both destruction and rebirth, raised his glass in a solitary toast to the empire he had protected at all costs, acknowledging the truth that had guided him from the beginning. In the game of power and betrayal, there are no true victories, only varying degrees of calculated sacrifice. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.